Do people usually, in your experience, do they have a plan for if they go on an event, should I reach the point where I can't communicate anymore and I get totally locked in, I can't blink, I can't reach you in any way, then this is what I want? Or is it now left to us to sort of figure out as we go?
I wish.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Okay.
You know, I share with people all the time, along the way, you know, there's choices to be made.
Yeah.
Now, whether you say yes or no, I'm not attached to. But my question is, what does yes mean? What does no mean? And have you explored all of the ramifications and consequences of that choice, whether you say yes or whether you say no? And in my experience, too many people don't. And what we try to do is help them explore that in a really, really good way.
Yes.
Because far too often in healthcare, people go in there, and sometimes there could be a slight edge in getting someone to lean to say yes, or maybe to say no.
So use an example. Let's talk about the feeding tube. So this is a really interesting disease, by the way. It's so different than a lot of the others that I've either studied or written about because it's so not black and white. Like for a lot of conditions, it's you have this, here's the treatment, this is just what you do.
Right.
But with ALS, there are so many forks in the road where it's advice, but there's no being told what to do. There's no what do you want to do, and then you don't know what you don't know.
You don't
so
know.
So unless they have a conversation with you or someone who's traveled this journey before, it's hard to anticipate what the ramifications of either choice are. So for example, the feeding tube. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do people not know, or what do they want to know when reaching that fork?
Well, this is where the art of language is really, really important.
Yeah.
How we show up for people, how we listen to people. When people are faced with a choice, again, oftentimes there's very much a lack of awareness, or people only know what they learn by going online.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes there's a great deal of drama online.
Yes.
So I often share with people, maybe you don't want to do that. And yet what we also offer are people, if you have a question, thought, or concern, call us. And, you know, it's a matter of people navigating the complexities of and possibilities of what that choice means. So if it's a feeding tube, for instance, what I'll often share with people is most of the time to say yes to a feeding tube, also known as a G tube or a PEG tube. Oftentimes it's a matter of just, what does it mean to say yes to this?
Yeah, what's your life going to look like now?
Well, oftentimes it's a piece of cake. That's what I share with people.
Okay.
Most of the time it truly is. But obviously, where's your breathing function? What's your vital lung capacity? Because that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
What is your swallowing looking like? So to say yes to a feeding tube, one way of looking at it, it's a great insurance policy, because if at some point you're unable to swallow, you know, maybe you have 2 weeks to live if you're unable to swallow.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's navigating, when do I do it, when do I not do it, you know, what does all that look like? I meet many people that don't even want to go there. Gordon, who I took care of, was an incredible teacher in regards to, I learned from him what it means when somebody makes their choices by never making them. Okay?
Yes.
And that's what he did. He never wanted to navigate. He didn't want to know anything. No, I don't want a feeding tube. No, I don't want invasive ventilation. And he stuck to that.
There's so much denial in that kind
and
of planning or not planning.
Of course there is, but that was his way. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I got it. Because he was really clear he wasn't going to do any of that. Okay. I still see a lot of that. So the evening of his last meal, we're at the Silver Lounge, the piano bar.
Yeah.
And napkins were piled up this high. And so from that moment, I looked up at him. He literally couldn't swallow anymore. And I looked at him, I said, is this it? And he, because he couldn't talk, he just gave a motion, well, I don't know.
Okay.
And I said, let's check in the morning. So the morning came, I was feeding him some Burple, which is a baby food for him. It's like a little dessert.
Yeah.
And literally, it just came out of his mouth.
Okay.
And that was that. And he didn't panic. He just looked at me, and I looked at him. And Betsy, his wife, came in, and here we were. He passed away 2 weeks later. Okay. So I often share with people, obviously, it's better to do it sooner rather than later. True. But then, of course, you come into the world of insurance, and that's changed over the years. So if your vital lung capacity isn't below, I believe, 50, I might be wrong, 50 or 60, whatever the number is, insurance really doesn't want to do it. Yet, fortunately, some people are wanting to do it earlier rather than later, because obviously if you're stronger,
It's safer to
of
undergo the
course,
surgery.
any
Yeah.
procedure, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what illness you have. Obviously, if we're stronger, it's going to be safer, which still doesn't mean things can't go wrong.
Right.
So I learned long ago, because people would call me many, many years ago, Ron, why didn't somebody tell me this could happen?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever this might have been. Maybe it's an infection. Maybe it kicked them on their backside.
Yeah, Bobby's feeding tube surgery went sideways.
Incredible to be
Yeah.
sideways.
Yeah.
And he was really upset.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have a really bad experience with it. Most of the time, it's quite
Routine,
easy.
yeah.
But it's no different than giving birth. Birth isn't always easy.
Right.
Okay, so there's all of these potentialities and possibilities, and in my world, it's best if we can share and kind of navigate and dance with it. What does it feel like? I've known too many people who said yes to invasive ventilation. They didn't even share it with their wives. They didn't know, and all of a sudden, I'm going to go ahead and do this. Excuse me? Again, you're saying yes. Do you know what you're saying yes to? And of course, in that realm, well, what does the care piece look like? And that's what most people, not most, but many choose not to navigate. They're so petrified and so traumatized by the diagnosis of ALS and living with ALS. How do we do this? You know, John Ember.
Yeah.
I love talking about John Ember.
Let's talk about John Ember.
That's
Is he behind us?
That's an Ember. Okay, so
He's
John.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The painting is a John Ember,
Right.
and
And that
John
documentary, what was the name of the documentary?
Ember's Left Hand.
Ember's Left Hand.
So
Phenomenal.
John, yeah. I remember knocking on John's door. I walked in, and there was John and Jill Hoy. And again, when I go into a home, you know, we do intake and everything, but, you know, I have no idea what I'm walking into.
Mm-hmm. Every family's different.
You know, I've walked into homes where I could write my name on the wall through cigarette smoke.
Oh, geez.
So how do you show up for that? Just like I've walked into homes where there's hoarders,
Okay.
and I've walked into beautiful homes and from every walks of life.
Right.
And
so
many
this,
stories.
Right. So this disease doesn't discriminate. It can happen, you know, to anyone at almost any age.
Yeah. I just met a 21-year-old last week.
Oh, jeez.
And that's a story unto itself because he's very checked out.
Okay.
And just, there's no communication, there's all. None whatsoever. But anyway, going into John's house, we met each other, and it's like, where am I? I'm looking around. And their home was their studio. And I'm just seeing all these extraordinary paintings, and Jill was extraordinary. And John and I immediately connected, and Jill said, I'm going to leave it to you guys. And she disappeared. And the first thing I said to John is, listen, I'm not here to tell you everything you don't want to know. And he looked at me and said, Ron, I want to know everything. And so, obviously, over time, we explored all of those possibilities. I shared everything he wanted to know. And in the moment, it was like accessibility. How do I stay here in my space? And as time went on, you know, we were able to figure all that out. So, but as time went on, John was very clear. He didn't want a feeding tube either. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We explored, talked about all of what it could possibly look like.
Yeah, I think part of the fear around having ALS, in addition to understanding that it's likely fatal and fairly quick, that you probably aren't going to be here for 20 more years, is just not understanding what it's going to feel like as each stage hits.
How do you know until you know?
What's it going to feel like, or what's it going to look like? And okay, if I'm going to die with this, what's that going to feel like?
What is it going to look like?
Yeah.
What is it going to feel like? What is it going to look like?
Yeah.
And
Am I going to be in pain? Am I going to be afraid? Am I going to struggle?
Mm-hmm.
What could it look like? And to have some sense of knowing really calms people down. To have some sense of being able to imagine what it's going to look like and feel like. So rather than it being totally unknown and this big blackness in the future that's going to be completely out of control, having a sense of understanding what the picture might look like gives people some ease, I think, some peace of mind.
If I'm attached to anything, it's that myself, my staff can bring calm, guidance, and awareness to the circumstance.
You do that, yeah.
If I'm attached.
Okay.
It would. I'm hope. That's always my hope.
Yeah. And some people are ready for that, and some aren't.
And many aren't.
Yeah.
And it's like John, who lived his ALS in a very conscious type of a way, who didn't want a feeding tube, but then decided to change his mind.
Yeah.
Because his pulmonary function was getting lower. His swallowing was becoming difficult. And as I'm sitting with him a year down the road, it's like, are you thinking about changing your mind? And it's like, yeah, maybe.
Because he's still painting.
He was still painting.
Yeah.
And I said, may I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And I said, are you ready to go? Because if you can no longer swallow, you'll pass away.
Yeah.
Right? And he went, no, I'm not ready.
Right. So
and I said, then you've answered your question.
Right.
But
so you help clarify those things for people. So rather than it being this fearful, vague thing that I can't really look at, so my disease is just going to keep marching along, and I'm going to get really close to the point where I have to make a decision, but I haven't thought about it because I'm a little afraid to look at that. You ask these just very sincere, direct questions that allow people, it allows the clouds to part, and for people to really see with clarity, oh, I do know what I want, and therefore that means I need this.
And this is possible.
Yeah.
And it's asking those questions from the heart in a compassionate way.
Right.
Not, I share with
It's
people,
sincere.
I'm not here to give
What do you
you
want?
I'm not here to give you advice.
Yeah.
Advice is me telling you what
From the mountain, yes.
what I think you should do.
Right.
So I work with counsel, which is a way of sharing, this is what I know, this is what I've seen, this is what's possible.
Yeah.
These are the possibilities. But it's really about delivering that information in a really, really good way. And when we can take the time to really listen to people, really, really listen. That's part of the art of showing up. What it means to show up is to truly listen. Because when we can, what's possible is the authentic self can emerge for you and for me. We can drop into this place of humanity where we really connect, and someone is actually seeing me, not judging me, and they're being with me. And when we can get to that place, hopefully, of our authentic self, then what's possible is one's vulnerable self can emerge. And that's what doesn't happen, unfortunately, in my opinion, nearly enough. To allow one to be vulnerable and to be able to me sitting with John's vulnerability, to allow him to feel without getting in the way of that.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, the getting in the way unconsciously happens way too often in our culture.
Right. So I've seen you do this so many times, and it's exquisitely beautiful, and it's just so human and so valuable to anyone going through this, and actually anyone anyway. But the example I love that you use is, if someone's allowing that open-hearted vulnerability to happen and expressing fear and sorrow or regret and there's crying involved in this, a lot of people will immediately reach for the tissues, and it's like, stop crying, cover that up. And you're like, no, I don't offer the tissues. Like, let the crying happen if that's what is showing up right now. Absolutely. Your ability to be with whatever is in front of you is, I think, one of the magical things that you and CCALS brings to people going through this.